Welcome back. This week, I've got a special guest. It's Dr. Jenn Salib Huber. She's a Canadian Registered Dietitian, a Naturopathic Doctor, and a certified intuitive eating counselor. And she's on a mission to help women manage menopause without diets and food rules. Welcome, Dr. Huber.
Thank you so much.
Today, it's all going to be about protein because this is something that I hear all the time, at least on my end in terms of training, and all over the media. Everyone in the public knows, okay, we need proper protein intake. And for us women in perimenopause and postmenopause, we've been told how important it is for us. So from the perspective of a registered dietitian, can you share why women in peri and postmenopause need to pay particular attention to increasing or having a certain protein level?
Yeah, and I love this conversation because protein is one of those things that sometimes takes on like magical, meaning. And so this idea that, if you hit your protein targets, magic, fireworks are going to happen. And we need to like dial it down that protein is a macronutrient. And, it's one of the three macronutrients, protein, carbohydrates, and fat, that we need from the time that we're born until the day that we die. And even though we're going through this midlife change and it does feel like everything is changing sometimes, we're still just a human body. And so protein's purpose doesn't really change all that much. What does change is that as humans age, both men and women, and especially as we age going through menopause and these hormone changes and the drop in estrogen levels, it's a little bit harder to maintain muscle. It's a little bit harder to build muscle. And we start to lose muscle and strength at a bit of an accelerated rate. And so what we're learning and what we know is that if we want to, kind of age well, and I'm saying that in air quotes only because that's not a defined thing either. But if we want to age with as much mobility, independence, strength, energy, vitality, health, all of those things as we can, which of course is going to vary with genetics and, access to healthcare and all those other determinants of health. But if we want to have something that we can tangibly sink our teeth into, building and maintaining muscle seems to be a big part of that equation. So in the last 10 years, as, more research is going into perimenopause and the menopause transition, the question has come up, well, how do we maybe offset some of these age-related changes, hormone-related changes? And that's kind of where protein has come into the conversation. So that's kind of the why, is we really want to use it as a tool along with strength training, because it doesn't work on its own because it's not magical, right? We need to be also trying to build the muscle with strength training. But if we can do that, and if we include, a little bit more protein, that seems to be a winning combination, at least, kind of in the limited research that we have. Because, to be completely honest, we don't have slam dunk research about how much, what kind, how often. And even though there's a lot of claims that are made about, oh, you need to get, this much and this often and within this time frame. And, really, most of the research that we have on protein has been done on 25-year-old men, first of all. Or it has been done in older adults who are maybe more on the frailty side of things, who are maybe not in this kind of active postmenopausal state that many of us, me included, find ourselves in. So we don't actually know what is ideal, which is what makes the conversation a bit more complicated.
That was such a great breakdown of the importance of why, and that it's not, when you said that it's not something magical happens when you get up, because that is the feel that you get from anything in social media. So this kind of leads me to a next question. Like, as a trainer, I've heard from a lot of nutrition coach colleagues that whenever they start working with someone, they're like, their female clients are just not getting enough protein. So in knowing that there's not any slam dunk research for women who are active, so you said not some sedentary, what would be something to think about in terms of what might be enough for us? And can you actually talk about how it does affect energy and performance? Because there's plenty of people who I'm sure like maybe think they're not getting enough, but they're like, but I feel okay when I do stuff. Like, would they even notice a difference if they're getting enough, whatever that enough is?
So let's back it up a little bit and say,
Okay.
what research do we have? What is the research that tells us that needs increase? So the largest body of research is observational data that has looked at people who have more muscle at a certain stage of life, let's say over 60, and looked at how much protein that they're eating and compared them to people who have less muscle at the same age. And this is an observation that was made that, people who have more muscle, more strength seem to eat more protein. Now, observational studies can only tell us about correlation. They cannot determine causation. So is it that they're eating more protein and therefore have more muscle? Or is it that people who are more active and have more muscle eat more protein? We don't know what direction that goes. So some of the intervention studies that have been done over the last few years have been kind of underwhelming, have found that, a little bit of extra protein may help, but some of the meta-analyses, so the studies of studies that have been published, have actually found that the nutrition interventions on muscle strength and building muscle are kind of underwhelming or sometimes not even statistically significant compared to strength training, which is a slam dunk if you want to build and maintain muscle, right? So we tend to focus so much on the what can I eat for the magic when really there is no magic. But that being said, we do know that as we get older, men and women, we use protein less efficiently. And this is kind of where I think, at the end of the day, when we do have really great, robust research, what we're going to find is that as we get older, hitting a little bit above the RDA is that little bit of extra insurance. And so some people talk about leucine and the leucine trigger hypothesis and all that kind of stuff, that it's certain types of protein. But really what we're talking about is just overall a little bit more of your protein intake, that target going up on the day. So if we're looking at the current RDA, which is 0.8 grams per kilogram of body weight, that's probably not enough for people over 40. When you look at the totality of research. When you look at research that has examined specific amounts, there really isn't anything to say that really high amounts, so things above, let's say like 1.6 grams per kilogram, net any benefit to people. So what I say is, let's look at what is normal eating, first of all. It's not normal eating to be trying to hit 150, 200 grams of protein a day. That's a really difficult thing to do without having to count, measure, and track all the time. And that's the part that becomes unsustainable. That's the part that sucks the joy out of eating. That's the part that makes people feel like they're thinking about protein all the time. But if we bring it back to, can I hit 25 to 30 grams a meal? Most days, not when I'm on vacation, without really worrying about my muscle mass and how that's impacting my training and my performance. For most people, that's doable. And we know that amount of 25 to 30 grams per meal is enough to stimulate muscle protein synthesis. So if you're trying to build muscle, you're actively strength training, you're living this active lifestyle, and you have this eye on having what I call a main character protein at most meals, then you don't have to count, measure, and track. If you're someone who has, specific health conditions, performance, goals, things like that, by all means, work with a dietitian, like narrow that number down, figure out what your range is, but still have someone who can help you work out, how do I do this without needing to count, measure, and track every bite?
So Jenn, I don't mean this disrespectfully, but what you're telling me, and I'm sure people listening to me, it kind of counters a lot of even other, nutrition experts that I won't necessarily be interviewing, but I'll see online. So especially for performance, I've heard exactly that. It should be, here we talk about in pounds, basically a gram of protein for every pound. So if you're 150 pounds, it's like 150 grams of protein a day. And for people to understand, like a chicken breast has like 30. So to try to get 150, that's like 5 chicken breasts a day, which seems like a lot. Which is, I think, where people get stressed out. Now I'm not sure, I don't really know. It's almost like opposing messages that are coming through in online and through social media.
And this is where I feel like, I wish that this online space wasn't so divisive about nutrition, because I would always say, like, show me the science. I will happily send you every reference I have for everything that I've said. And I love research. I want to be proven wrong, but I want it to be based on science that we can hang our hat on. A lot of times when people share things about anything related to nutrition, they're not intervention studies, they're observational research, and it's not specific to the population that we're studying. And so we don't know enough about how to support postmenopausal women, especially, who are active, not frail, not in a care facility, not diseased. We don't know enough to say you have to do this. We do know that, we do know that the RDA is too low. I agree with that. I do think that the RDA is too low. We do know that protein synthesis and muscle protein synthesis changes and declines as we get older, and that getting a little bit more protein can help to overcome that. We know that. We know that strength training is the determining factor, at least from the data that we have of both men and women, older adults, that strength training is the game changer, not getting 200 grams of protein a day. So, and when I talk to people who are, trying, especially people who maybe haven't been active their whole life, people who have been active and maybe had an eye, especially on performance-based nutrition, this is just like a slight adjustment for them. But for people who are maybe for the first time trying to adopt these health behaviors and thinking of the long game and thinking about how can I carry my groceries when I'm 80, it is daunting, overwhelming, unsatisfying, and really just problematic, I think, when they hear the message, well, you need to be eating 200 grams of protein a day. So this is kind of where, as an intuitive eating counselor, I help people figure out what are these main character proteins that we can include at most meals in ways that are satisfying, that are filling, because that's the other function of protein. It's not just muscle, it's to help us feel full and satisfied. How can we do that? And then see how people feel. Or, if you're meeting your goals, your performance goals, your strength goals, and you feel good in your body and you feel like you have decent energy compared to your age-related peers, whatever that is, then maybe you're doing everything right. Maybe you don't need to make these crazy adjustments. So, so I'm a bit of a realist that way. And I know sometimes that comes across as like the unsexy message around protein. But, after 25 years of being a dietitian and as somebody who is postmenopausal and has been through all of this, I'm just not convinced that the data is there that we need to be shooting for these crazy high targets.
So you're making me think about even colleagues, friends I have that are powerlifters or Olympic lifters, something on the competitive side where they might be working with a dietitian to help them in their performance. So even then, can I assume there's where they have to up their intake? There's still not exactly data showing that this huge increase of protein is really affecting their performance in as much as they think they are. It is.
So I would say that people who are in that scale of performance are not the average person that we're talking about, right? So people who are training, 10, 15, 20 hours a week, that is not your average postmenopausal person who's trying to just maintain muscle and bone and strength and activity levels. So that's going to be a different scenario, right? Because their needs are different. And I would hope that somebody's working with a dietitian, a sports dietitian in those instances, right? And that's where I think sometimes we look at people in those spaces and say, well, if that's working for them and what they're doing, then we need to apply that to everyone. And that's not the case, because what happens when we overemphasize any nutrient is that satisfaction tends to take a hit. Sometimes we can get into some really disordered eating habits because we've put this nutrient on a pedestal and we will choose it over everything else, even if we don't want it. And for some people, especially people who have, disordered eating or a history of eating disorders, which is not an insignificant percentage of people in our age group, it can be really challenging to have that peaceful, easy relationship with food that we want. And so what I tell people is, think about protein, give it a main character role on your plate, but don't make it the only thing that you think about. And don't feel like you're doing something wrong if you have a meal without it, because really what we're doing is playing the long game here. It's what we do most of the time, not every single meal of every single day.
That's very helpful. So I'm going to summarize, you tell me if that needs any adjustment. So for the average midlife and beyond person who is active, so not necessarily, and when we say someone who's someone who's a competitive athlete, we mean someone who's getting paid to be an athlete. For the average person who even if they might compete in something, but they have a day job, the protein emphasis of 1 gram per pound of body fat that need is not substantiated.
Yeah, I would say that for most people, that's going to be an overestimate. And unless there is research that I'm not aware of, and I'm in this research all the time looking for new information. And when people ask me to come on their podcast, I always go in and say, is there something new? And I did that today and didn't find anything new. So you're going to find small studies. You're going to find, studies of young active men, unfortunately, that may show these
exercise too. Yeah.
Yeah, right. And that might show those kinds of outcomes, but they're not long-term. They're not on women. They're not postmenopausal. And we also need to be comparing it. There are studies that have looked at 0.8 grams versus 1 versus 1.2. And when they look at functional testing of strength, they haven't found much difference. And so this is kind of what we need to bring it down to is if you are not an Olympic athlete who is competing and training 20, 25 hours a week, then what is going to be under the umbrella of normal eating for you? And what is going to help you feel better in your body and not just about hitting a protein target?
I love that. Thank you so much. I wanted to bring up another role protein that I also hear women in my age group they think about the weight gain they've had through perimenopause or postmenopause, and that I need to cut my carbs, up my protein. That's another thing. Can you talk a little bit more if that is true and your thoughts on that?
Oh, I have thoughts.
That's why I'm so happy you're here.
Yeah, I'm like the chief defender of carbohydrates because carbohydrates have gotten such a bad rap.
I love it.
Yeah, all the time, every day till the day I die, because carbohydrates get a really bad rap. When in fact, carbohydrates are not only a source of energy, they're our body's preferred energy. And so what I often see is people overemphasizing protein, demonizing carbohydrates, feeling tired, endurance is dropping, recovery is dropping. They up the protein, but they don't up the carbohydrates. And really what we want is a balance that works. So protein isn't magical. It is not going to stimulate weight loss. Neither will carbohydrates cause weight gain. What happens in menopause, especially, is that as our estrogen levels drop and lean muscle starts to decrease, we tend to have more body fat than muscle compared to our premenopausal years. And so there may be changes in our energy requirements. Building muscle, which includes strength training and protein, can help to offset that, but it's not the protein that is driving that. Some people find that when they increase their protein, they might feel more full and satisfied. So maybe they have less reactive eating. Maybe they're just able to meet their energy needs more intuitively. Great. But it's not the protein doing magical things. It's just protein doing its role of playing with the other things on your plate and doing what it's supposed to do, which is to help you feel full and satisfied and hopefully maintain some strength.
I was going to ask you also about protein timing, if that matters. So I remember listening to a podcast with, I don't want to name names. So she's a medical doctor, and she talks a lot about nutrition. She was on the Huberman, but she talked about the importance of protein timing and also the quantity of protein. So does protein timing matter? Because for her, she's like your first meal.
This is a developing area. And so when we look at, again, some of the studies that we have on protein timing, the overarching kind of summary is that if you're meeting your needs over the day, that protein timing is like I can't say that word today, superfluous, right? So it's just like, it's a drop in the bucket. It's not actually going to make that much of a difference to the average person.
Okay.
You can certainly find research, again, mostly in men, young men, that shows that if you get, that 20 to 40 gram dose within 2 hours, because muscle is being synthesized after workouts, that it's going to have an effect. But again, when you compare it on the whole, what's most important is getting enough over the day. And so what I find is that people get into like this all or nothing thinking. And so, they're trying to hit this protein right after they work out. And then if they forget or life gets in the way and they can't do it, they're like, oh, well, I messed up. I'm just going to start over tomorrow. And so that all or nothing thinking prevents many people, I think, from hitting their protein targets. Or they're sacrificing satisfaction because they're choking back this protein shake right after working out when they may not even be hungry because they feel like they have to. And so I think protein timing is an interesting one that is actually being actively explored in the research. So that 25 to 30 grams for muscle protein synthesis has been studied, relatively well. There are some studies looking at older adults, looking at 30 to 40 grams twice a day. Is that more helpful? We know that especially the evening meal in older adults tends to be their lowest protein meal. So if we emphasize protein earlier in the day, does that have any benefit? What I tell people is that if it lines up with when you're hungry and when you want to eat, great. Some people really have no appetite after they work out. And, to kind of, to take in protein actually makes them feel kind of ick. So in that case, I say just focus on hitting your targets for the day. Keep that 25 to 30 grams per meal in mind, maybe a little bit extra with a snack, and see how you feel. And, I think there's this desire, which is completely understandable, to get it right. It's like, oh, I just want to get it right.
I was like optimizing.
Exactly.
Yes,
right.
that's it.
But we're human beings. We're not a machine. And so there's so many variables around, food isn't just about building muscle. And so if we're making every decision around like, is this going to build muscle? Is this going to lose weight? Is this going to do whatever? We're micromanaging it, and it's never going to feel intuitive. And I think for a lot of people, it doesn't feel good, which is why there's always this question like, does it really matter? Or can I just have it whenever? So that's kind of my take on it. And again, I love research, and I fully admit that this is evolving, and we may in a few years have, good research that says, yeah, the timing really matters, but I would still suspect that it's only going to matter some of the time and for some people. I don't think that for the average person, it's going to be the make or break factor in whether or not you're building muscle.
I think it's just the proliferation of, again, what we see online and how we always want to optimize, because even on Huberman Lens, like how to optimize your sleep, how to optimize your protein. So it feels like if I don't do it this way, then it's like a waste. Like it's an all or nothing. Like, oh, I'm not having protein after my workout. Basically, I didn't build any muscle after my workout because I didn't have my protein right after.
Like that's just not the case.
Yeah.
My favorite thing to say is that human beings are resilient. And if we needed to micromanage every meal, every gram of protein, every bite of food, you and I would not be having this conversation because we would not have survived, right? We are resilient.
Yeah.
When you look at the centenarians, right? Have they been like micromanaging their protein? They have not.
Yep. They're also not doing HIIT workouts every day, and probably not even doing the type of strength training that we're all trying to work on. Yeah.
Yeah. And I love strength training. I strength train several times a week. I own protein powder. I enjoy it regularly. It's a tool in my toolbox. I love finding ways to enjoy protein as part of what I eat, but I never sacrifice satisfaction. I never count, measure, or track how much I'm getting. I really focus on, am I feeling good? Am I making progress in my strength training? Do I feel strong? That is the measure of, am I getting enough?
And I wondered if you can because you've probably given a lot of clients advice on. So now that we know we're not necessarily going for a number of protein for the protein in our meals, but maybe some ways that you do incorporate it in your breakfast. I guess dinner is probably the easiest way people think of traditional meals, but maybe breakfast and lunch, how you satisfactorily incorporate it into those early meals.
Yeah, well, I my two favorites are Greek yogurt and cottage cheese. I'm a really big fan of both of those. I think they're super versatile. You can mix them with oatmeal. You can have them on their own. You can have them with other things, and you're also getting a nice dose of calcium. Like, there's just lots of reasons why I love those two things. I personally don't super love eggs. I like a frittata or something, but that's not a quick and easy breakfast. I'm not a 5-egg omelet kind of person, so I'm not gonna. That's not gonna be my go-to. But sometimes I also enjoy just making a smoothie, especially in the summer when it's hot. I'll do a smoothie and throw some protein powder in. That's another kind of quick go-to. My favorite for lunches that people often forget about is canned fish, sardines, tuna, salmon. Again, super versatile, accessible, take it with you anywhere, really easy. And you're also getting the benefits of not just the protein, but those omega-3 fats. And in the ones with bones, so sardines and salmon, you're also getting the calcium. So I'm a really big fan of just kind of keeping it easy. And like you said, suppers tend to be a little bit easier. But I always like to combine, beans and lentils with a meat, for example. So we do a lot of chicken and chickpea curries, or a soup with chicken and beans, because adding that plant-based protein, that plant-forward approach just helps to increase fiber, which people love to think about protein, but fiber often gets forgotten because fiber is a starch. It's a carbohydrate. And if you're not eating plants and if you're watching your carbs and you're doing a lot of protein, dollars to donuts, I would bet that you're probably falling short on fiber. So thinking about protein is great. Adding in some beans, some lentils, some starches is a kind of nice way to round that out at the evening meals. But those are my go-tos.
Oh, I love those suggestions. I think you're right about beans, people, and then even oatmeals. People think of it as the carbs. Carbs are bad, but as we get older, I just even know postmenopause with my blood sugar was higher postmenopause, and essentially the doctor's like, you need to eat more fiber.
And cholesterol.
But anyway,
our cholesterol jumps 5 to 10%. And, an oatmeal with its soluble fiber and beta glucan is one of the best things that you can include if you're trying to lower your cholesterol through diet.
I love that. And then the last question I had, because I know it's your specialty, what are some other common nutritional challenges that people in midlife, women in midlife, have that you also work to support?
Yeah.
Nutritional challenges.
Yeah. Fiber is probably the biggest one, because what happens is that, especially for people who have maybe had this protein focus, they tend to all of a sudden find themselves like you did with maybe your blood sugar a little bit higher, or like I did, my cholesterol jumped a bit after postmenopause. And now all of a sudden fiber takes center stage. But sometimes there's what I call this undieting that has to happen because people have this fear of starting the day with oatmeal, which again, I can show you study after study after study that says when people start the day with oatmeal, they have better blood sugar, they have better cholesterol, their overall, all measures of metabolic health improve. It's really just the fear mongering about carbohydrates that have scared people off of this food that we have had, as part of human breakfasts, at least in many parts of the world, for many, many years. So this undieting of letting go of the food fears, the food rules, and really just trying to look at it through an evidence-based lens and an updated evidence-based lens, because nutrition science is changing all the time. And so you want to make sure that whoever you're working with really is in at least the research or has ways to stay updated. And, unfortunately, a lot of the messaging on social media was never evidence-based to begin with, and certainly isn't keeping up with the evidence. So make sure that you're getting information from the right people is kind of the first thing. But the other thing that people are missing is joy. Food is meant to be enjoyable. It is meant to be pleasurable. We talk about food joy and intuitive eating. You should get excited when you have chocolate cake or whatever your favorite dessert is. You shouldn't feel guilty. You shouldn't feel like you've done something wrong. And you certainly shouldn't feel like it has no place in your life. So regardless of what you're eating and why and where, you should welcome pleasure to your plate. It's a necessary component of a healthy relationship with food.
And I always think of food, cuisine it's part of human culture, and then the different ethnic cultures.
All around the world. What do we do when a baby's born?
Right.
We bring food. What do we do when someone dies? We bring food. What do we do when someone has a birthday or a wedding or a celebration of any kind? We bring food. It is woven into our DNA. And this whole diet wellness culture has tried to strip it down to this bare bones of, what is its chemical structure? And that's just not how we eat.
Dr. Huber, thank you so much for your insight and your experience. I didn't realize you've been a dietitian for 25 years. So yeah. You've seen a lot, you've read a lot.
I appreciate the chance to kind of share this. And, especially like you said, this might be a bit of a surprise to some of your viewers and your listeners. This might be a different message, but just goes to show that, there can be many different opinions, and it really is about finding the one that aligns with what you want, what you believe in, but also aligns with science. And, and unless, like I said, I'm willing to be proven wrong, but at this point, I think that the science says that we need a little bit more regularly, but we don't need to be killing ourselves trying to get all the protein all the time.
The perfect summary. Dr. Huber, thank you so much. And the ways you can find her, I'm going to put in the show notes, from your Instagram to your website. And I look forward to talking to you all next week.
I'm Coach Tina. For more information about how to work with me, head to ironstrongfitness.com and send me a message. I'll see you next time.